Hold on, don't miss this next part. But before you hear it, tell me in the comments. Where are you watching and what are you doing? They asked me to leave my own company while a security guard escorted me. His cologne a strange blend of corn chips and exhaustion. That moment was 5 weeks ago. But the truth traces back much farther. If we're being honest, and why pretend now? The real beginning was a tiny studio apartment and a malfunctioning microwave nearly a decade earlier. I remember reheating leftover noodles while debugging the earliest prototype of a sentiment analysis engine that barely understood half the emotions humans do. It was midnight, I had a pounding headache, and I was about 3 hours away from accidentally engineering something that would eventually prevent a major corporation from facing a billion-dollar reputation meltdown. Back then it wasn't a company, it was just me, a rickety whiteboard, and a laptop that sounded like it sighed out of frustration every time I opened a new file. The walls were cracked, the neighbors argued endlessly through thin drywall, and the fanciest thing I owned was 2-ply tissue paper I bought on sale. But one night something changed. The model worked. Actually worked. And when it did, a ridiculous burst of joy punched straight through my exhaustion, like gravity had briefly decided to give me a pass. 18 months later, that cramped apartment had transformed into a definitely not up-to-code workspace overflowing with part-time developers and borrowed chairs. Our caffeine expenses outweighed our rent. Between sleepless deadlines, instant noodles, and that bizarre month when people on social media thought our back-end system was predicting the end of the world, we finally got noticed. A mid-tier tech firm approached us with promises so shiny you could practically see the reflection. Funding, growth opportunities, mentorship. They said, "We want to honor your vision. We just want to help it grow." So I sold the company for $1. Yes, one single dollar. Not because I was naive, but because the deal included equity, long-term influence, and one beautifully hidden contract clause. If they ever dismissed me without proper cause, I could buy the company back for the exact same amount. My lawyer, Eli, paused when he found that line in the agreement. "You think they'll overlook it?" he asked. I laughed. "They won't even notice it." And they didn't. Not the new CFO, Colin, whose confidence was powered entirely by spreadsheets and an overpolished jawline. Not Miranda, the self-appointed VP of Brand Harmony, who once told me the word analytics was too intimidating for our presentations. And definitely not the board, who read contracts the way some people skim recipes, just enough to pretend they understood it. Before we go any further, a quick reality check. About 95% of you watching aren't subscribed. I get it. Commitment is intimidating. But I'm trying to hit my first 10,000 subscribers ever. So if you enjoy stories where overconfident executives accidentally hand me back my entire legacy for the cost of a gas station coffee, feel free to subscribe. No pressure, just a virtual high five. Anyway, after selling I stayed. Officially as Chief Strategy Officer. Unofficially as the last person who still cared about the mission. At first everything seemed manageable. Colin drowned himself in financial dashboards. Miranda posted motivational quotes online and collected networking events like trophies. But cracks started forming. Monthly innovation meetings turned into branding discussions without a single engineer invited. The R&D floor was repainted in soft pastel colors that somehow increased everyone's headaches. Instead of studying real user feedback, they ran comments through mood polishing software that forced everything to sound artificially cheerful. Meanwhile, every time I spoke in a meeting, Colin would interrupt with meaningless buzzwords about market harmonization and projected momentum cycles. Miranda began introducing me as our original spark, which is basically corporate language for, she used to matter. I stayed quiet. I observed. I waited. Then came the day of the Vision Renewal Summit, a 3-hour meeting that could have been replaced by a single sticky note reading. We're ignoring everything that actually matters. Colin stood at the front of the room like he was about to deliver a TED Talk called How to Misread a Spreadsheet with Confidence. He clicked to a slide filled with glowing arrows, animated gradients, and absolutely zero substance. Revenue projections indicate a rising trajectory contingent upon strategic realignment and role optimization, he declared proudly. Which, translated into human language, meant, we're reorganizing, and someone's getting fired. I didn't even have time to pretend to take notes before Miranda added, and to streamline our creative resonance, we'll be restructuring leadership roles. Her voice had that syrupy tone people use when they're about to push you off a metaphorical cliff while complimenting your shoes. She clicked to the next slide. And my name wasn't listed anywhere. It was like someone had erased me from my own story. Colin cleared his throat. We appreciate your contributions, but your skill set doesn't align with the direction we're moving. Translation. You built the entire foundation, but we don't like being reminded of that. Miranda chimed in with, you'll always be a part of our origin story, like she was delivering a eulogy instead of terminating my employment. The rest of the room avoided eye contact, the way people do when they know something is unfair but don't want to lose their parking spot. I sat there for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable enough to cling to the walls. Then I smiled. Okay, I said simply. They seemed confused, like they expected tears or shouting, or at least one dramatic speech about betrayal. Instead, I packed my bag, stood up and said, good luck. Truly. Because I already knew what they didn't. Their mistake wasn't firing me. Their mistake was firing me without cause. The security guard escorted me out, a very polite man who smelled strongly of disappointment and lemon disinfectant. He apologized 3 separate times, even though he was the only person in that building with a soul. Outside, the wind was cold but refreshing, like the universe had just handed me a reset button. I walked away from the building without looking back. Why would I? I knew I'd be returning soon enough through the front door, with legal ownership. The moment I got home, I called Eli. They fired me, I told him. There was a pause. Without cause. Without cause. I heard him grin through the phone. Then congrats, he said. You just bought your company back for $1. The next morning, we contacted the board. Colin tried to argue, of course. He talked in circles, tripping over his own business jargon like a toddler in dress shoes. Miranda accused me of exploiting a technicality. I reminded her that reading contracts is generally a smart move in business. But the board? They were silent, staring at the clause they'd signed without blinking. Their own signatures trapped them. 48 hours later, the transfer was complete. Ownership reverted to me. The press got involved. Investors panicked. Employees celebrated quietly in group chats. Colin submitted a resignation so long I suspect he cried in the middle of writing it. Miranda unfollowed me on every social platform within minutes. And me? I walked back into the office I built from nothing. I placed a $1 coin on my desk like a trophy. Then I opened my laptop, took a deep breath and whispered to myself, let's do this right this time. Walking back into that building felt surreal. Like stepping into an alternate version of my own past. People tried not to stare, but they definitely did. Some smiled. Some whispered. A few pretended to be hyper-focused on their screens, typing aggressively just to avoid eye contact. The energy in the room felt like everyone had just witnessed a plot twist. They didn't know whether they were allowed to celebrate. I went straight to the top floor, my floor, where the door still had my name etched on the glass. They never got around to changing it. Maybe they thought they'd do it after the rebrand. Oops. My first order of business wasn't revenge, despite what the internet speculated. It was simple clarity. I gathered the entire team, from interns to engineers, into the common area. There was this low buzz of uncertainty, like everyone expected me to show up with a flamethrower. Instead, I stood on a chair, because you can't reclaim a company without a little dramatic flair, and said, no one is losing their job today. The relief that rippled through the room felt almost physical. Next, I took a deep breath and said, we're rebuilding. Not to become prettier. Not sleeker. Not trendier. We're rebuilding to become meaningful again. We are going back to solving real problems, not just repainting walls in pastel colors and giving fake inspirational speeches. People actually laughed. A few clapped. Someone in the back said, thank God, under their breath. After the meeting, I went through Colin's old office. It looked exactly how you'd imagine. Sterile, overly organized, and covered in graphs that meant nothing. I opened a drawer and found 3 identical bottles of expensive hair gel. Some mysteries solved themselves. Then came Miranda's office. an explosion of vanity awards, vision boards, and scented candles labeled things like Ambition Fog and Success Blossom. Her desk drawer contained a stack of printed affirmations. You are the sparkle. Branding is oxygen. Data is optional. I put them in a neat pile and left them on her chair with a sticky note that said, Data is not optional. Over the next few days, employees started stopping by my office one by one. Some apologized for not defending me. Some admitted they were scared. Some just wanted to say welcome back. I told every single one of them the same thing. You don't have to apologize. We're building forward, not backward. The biggest challenge, though, was undoing the damage leadership had caused while trying to optimize us into irrelevance. Weeks of digging through documents uncovered a graveyard of half-executed initiatives, abandoned user research, and a marketing strategy that centered mostly around inspirational quotes and pastel gradients. The financials? A mess. The product roadmap? A disaster. The team morale? Surprisingly salvageable. But somewhere between scheduling emergency meetings and rewriting a year's worth of plans, I had a moment of stillness. I stood by the window in the office I built, watching the city lights flicker, reflecting off the glass like fragments of an old dream. This place, my place, was alive again. Not perfect, not stable, not fully healed, but alive. And maybe that's all a comeback ever really needs. About 3 weeks into rebuilding, I realized something. The company wasn't the only thing that needed repairing. I had spent so long fighting, defending, negotiating, pushing, surviving, that I'd forgotten how to simply create. The version of me in that tiny studio apartment, eating microwave noodles and scribbling algorithms on a stained whiteboard, she wasn't driven by investor decks or quarterly performance charts. She was driven by curiosity, by obsession even. And somewhere along the corporate roller coaster, that part of me had been pushed into the background like an outdated software patch. So I started coming in early, ridiculously early, before the sun, before the noise, before the Slack notifications could find me. Just me, a cup of overly strong coffee and a blank notepad. It felt like meeting myself again after a long separation. The team noticed the shift too. People were staying later. Not because they were afraid, but because they were excited. Someone brought in plants. Someone else fixed the broken toaster in the break room. A group of designers repainted a section of the office whiteboard wall that had been neglected since the pastel era. One morning, I walked in to find a sticky note on my monitor that said, "Thanks for bringing the soul back." No one signed it. But success, even the rebuilding kind, doesn't come without friction. Some board members started getting antsy. They wanted faster results, flashier announcements, something loud enough to distract from the fact that the previous leadership team had almost run us into the ground. I told them no. We weren't rushing. We were rebuilding intentionally, brick by brick, line by line, feature by feature. One board member tried to corner me after a meeting. "Don't you feel pressure to prove yourself?" he asked. I smiled politely, even though what I wanted to say was, "Sir, I literally bought this company back for $1. I think I've proven enough." Instead, I said, "I don't feel pressured. I feel focused." He didn't like that answer, but I did. By month 2, we launched our first initiative under the new leadership. A complete redesign of the emotional intelligence engine that started everything 10 years ago. It wasn't glossy. It wasn't flashy. It was powerful. Real users cried during testing, not because something was wrong, but because they felt genuinely understood. That's the kind of success money can't fabricate. Then something unexpected happened. Applications started pouring in. People from other companies, good people, wanted to join us. Some said they were tired of corporate nonsense. Some said they missed being part of something meaningful. Others said they just wanted to work somewhere where leadership actually listened. For the first time in years, we weren't chasing talent. Talent was chasing us. But the moment that hit me the hardest was when our youngest intern, Maya, stopped me in the hallway. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. "Of course. I was here when they fired you. Everyone pretended it was fine, but it wasn't. And when you walked out, the whole place felt empty for weeks." I swallowed. "Thank you for telling me," I said softly. But we're here now. And we're building something better. She smiled. Yeah, we are. There it was again, that spark. The thing Miranda tried to brand while misunderstanding it entirely. The soul of a company isn't logos or slogans or pastel color palettes. It's the people brave enough to care. By month 3, the transformation was undeniable. The office felt different, lighter, louder, alive in a way I hadn't seen since the very beginning. But the higher we climbed, the more attention we attracted, and not all of it was friendly. One afternoon, Eli called me sounding uncharacteristically serious. You might want to check your inbox, he said. Which is never something you want to hear from your lawyer. I opened my email and found a message from one of the former board members, the one who always spoke in thinly veiled threats wrapped in faux professional language. We need to discuss recent organizational decisions and potential conflicts arising from the reinstated ownership structure. Translation: We didn't expect you to succeed, and now we're nervous. I replied with a single sentence. Happy to discuss. Please provide specific concerns. He never did. Because vague intimidation only works on people who don't read their contracts. While they were busy panicking, we were busy building. Our engineering team released a beta version of a tool that analyzed emotional tone in real time during support calls. During internal testing, one customer service rep burst into tears. Not because she was overwhelmed, but because the system flagged she was stressed and automatically routed her a break. Innovation isn't always big and flashy. Sometimes it's just humane. The momentum grew. Investors who once treated me like a quirky founder they inherited started requesting meetings again. Reporters reached out. Someone even sent a fruit basket with a card that said, "Congratulations on the world's cheapest acquisition." I ate the pineapple and ignored the sarcasm. But with growth came responsibility. Heavy, fragile responsibility. I spent late nights reviewing code, early mornings mentoring new hires, and entire afternoons navigating government compliance requirements that felt like deciphering ancient riddles. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes with caring this much. The kind that feels like carrying a heavy lantern through the dark, not because someone asked you to, but because you refused to let anyone else walk without light. One night, well past sunset, I found myself alone in the office again. Screens glowing. Coffee cold. Papers scattered. I leaned back in my chair, stared at the ceiling and said out loud, "Is this really sustainable?" A ridiculous question because of course it wasn't. But necessary because pretending otherwise would be dishonest. Then I heard footsteps. It was Maya, the intern who had quietly become the heart of the product team. "Working late again?" she asked. "Occupational hazard," I said with a smile. She hesitated, then stepped into the room. "Do you want to know why people here believe in you?" I blinked. "I guess. Because you believe in the work," she said. "Not the titles, not the politics, not the optics. Just the work. And that makes people feel safe." I didn't know what to say. Sometimes the truth is so simple it hits harder than the complicated things. After she left, I sat there a long time. The exhaustion was still there. The stress was still there. The responsibility was still there. But something else was there too. A quiet certainty. That this wasn't just a comeback. It was a beginning. And beginnings? They're my specialty. By month 4, something incredible and a little terrifying started happening. People outside the company began talking about us again. Not in the patronizing "look at the little startup trying its best" way, but with genuine curiosity. Industry forums whispered. Competitors watched. Investors circled like very polite sharks wearing designer suits. But the biggest shock? A message request from someone I hadn't heard from since the early days. Lena, my former co-founder. The woman who once lived on energy drinks and sheer ambition. Who fought beside me for years before burning out so violently that she vanished from the entire tech scene. I stared at her message for a long time. "Heard what happened. Proud of you. Coffee." My chest tightened, not from fear, but from the strange emotional muscle memory of someone who once knew me better than I knew myself. I replied, "Absolutely. Same place." She wrote back, "Of course. Where else?" The cafe hadn't changed. Still smelled like roasted beans and old novels. Still had the same cracked leather chairs we pretended were vintage instead of falling apart. Lena was already there, sitting in the corner with a mug cupped in both hands. She looked older, not in a worn-out way, just in a lived way. When she saw me, she stood and hugged me like the past decade collapsed into a single moment. "So, you bought the company back for $1, she said, deadpan. "Technically, yes. You always had a flair for drama. Look who's talking." We laughed, and suddenly it felt like no time had passed at all. Once the laughter softened, she grew quiet. "I'm sorry I left the way I did," she said. Her voice wasn't shaky, it was steady. Honest. I shook my head. "You burned out, Lena. You didn't abandon me." "I abandoned myself," she corrected gently. "But I'm better now. Therapy, distance, working on things that don't require sacrificing my soul." I smiled. "I'm glad. Truly." She sipped her coffee, then asked, "So, what's next for you? For the company?" I leaned back, letting the loud hum of the cafe wash over us. "We're rebuilding. Slowly. Intentionally. But there's something bigger I want to create. Something we never had the chance to before." She raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "A culture that doesn't eat people alive. A team that stays curious. A company we'd actually want to work at." Lena stared at me for a long beat, then smiled in that familiar way that always hinted she was about to do something reckless and brilliant. "You need help." My breath caught. "Are you offering?" She shrugged like it was simple. "If you'll have me." I laughed, soft, disbelieving, relieved. "You know I will." That night, walking home, I felt something unfamiliar blooming in my chest. Not fear. Not stress. Not responsibility. Hope. The kind that feels warm and fragile and powerful all at once. Because getting my company back was one thing. Rebuilding it was another. But getting us back? That was something else entirely. The next week felt like the beginning of a new chapter. One I didn't even realize I'd been waiting for. Lena showed up on Monday morning with a backpack, a sketchpad, and a lanyard she'd clearly stolen from her old job. "Don't judge me," she said. Their printer was broken, and I didn't want to ask for permission. Classic Lena. Inside the office, people whispered in the hallway as she walked past. Some recognized her name from the origin story. Some had seen her in old photos taped to the back of a forgotten filing cabinet. Some had heard rumors of the mythical co-founder, who once built 5 features in 3 days using only stubbornness and 4 cans of cold brew. Lena just waved awkwardly at everyone like a celebrity who wasn't sure if she deserved the attention. I led her to my office. It felt symbolic somehow. Back then, our office had been a desk wedged between a dying plant and a radiator that never turned off. Now it was a glass-walled room with real chairs and a door that didn't jam. "Fancy," she said. "Overrated," I replied. We sat. We looked at each other. And then we burst out laughing because of course we did. When the laughter died down, she opened her sketchpad. Inside were pages of ideas, raw, messy, brilliant. "I've been thinking," she said, tapping a page covered in arrows and rough UI mockups. "Your emotional intelligence engine? What if it didn't just react to people, but help them understand themselves?" I stared at the page, at the jagged lines, at the messy handwriting, at the spark I hadn't seen in years. "You came in ready to work," I said. She smirked. "Please. I've been ready for months." We started small. Every morning, she'd take over the whiteboard and map out human emotion in ways that shouldn't make sense but somehow did. The team adored her instantly. Engineers asked her philosophical questions during lunch. Designers begged to steal her for brainstorming sessions. Even Maya followed her around with a notebook like an apprentice wizard. One afternoon, I caught Lena explaining emotional feedback loops using hand puppets she found in the office supply closet. Everyone was dying laughing. For the first time in a long time, I heard real joy echo through the hallways. But with progress came complexity. Rebuilding a company isn't just code and culture, it's logistics, payroll, legal compliance, deadlines, data migration, hiring pipelines, rewriting handbooks, and negotiating with people who pretend they invented the concept of urgency. Some nights I felt like I was juggling 8 flaming batons while riding a unicycle on a treadmill. And yet, every time I felt overwhelmed, I'd look up and see my team. Not just surviving, thriving. And Lena at the center of it all, tossing ideas into the air like fireworks. One night, after everyone else had gone home, I found her sitting alone in the common area. The lights were dim. Her sketchpad was open. Her expression was soft, thoughtful. "Everything okay?" I asked. She looked up, smiled faintly. "Yeah, I just forgot what it felt like to love the work." I sat across from her. "Burnout steals that from you." "I know." She exhaled. "But you brought it back." I shook my head. "No, you brought yourself back." She laughed quietly. "Maybe. But you opened the door." For a while we sat there in silence. Not awkward. Not heavy. Just comfortable. The kind of silence that only exists between people who survive the same storm. Finally she asked, "Do you think we can actually pull this off?" I smiled. "Lena, we already are. If you want more content like this every day, hit follow and turn on notifications."